The arrogant heir fired me from the development project, forgetting that the water rights to the luxury golf course were deeded to my grandfather and passed down to me. My name is Wyatt Thorne. I'm 53 years old, and I've been managing land assets for Callahan Regional Trust for 30 years. 30 years of drought easements, mineral surveys, access roads, and water tables. 30 years of knowing which parcels flood in spring and which ones turn to dust by August. I started there right after my Navy discharge. 6 years on supply ships taught me one thing that translated perfectly to land management. Logistics is everything. Doesn't matter what you're building if you can't get resources to it. Doesn't matter what you own if you can't sustain it. The Callahan family understood that. Old Robert Callahan hired me when I was 23 years old, with nothing but a GED, military discipline, and a grandfather who'd taught me to read survey maps before I could read chapter books. My grandfather was a waterman, spent his whole life in this valley, drilling wells, mapping aquifers, filing claims. When the State Water Board was still figuring out allocation law, Grandpa Earl was already filing his paperwork. He knew something everyone else forgot. In the West, water isn't just valuable. Water is everything. He left me 340 acres of scrubland that nobody wanted. Dry grass, rocky soil, not worth developing. But underneath that scrubland, he'd secured primary water rights to the Cedar Creek Aquifer, rights that predated every municipal claim by 40 years, rights that fed every downstream development for 11 miles. I never told anyone at Callahan Trust about those rights. Never seemed relevant. The land sat there, and I managed the trust's portfolio like I was supposed to. 62,000 acres across 4 counties. I knew every easement, every title defect, every handshake deal that never made it to paper. Robert Callahan trusted me completely. When his wife got sick, he asked me to handle the quarterly reports so he could focus on her care. When the 2008 crash hit and half our tenants defaulted, I renegotiated 37 leases in 90 days, saved the trust $4.2 million in potential losses. I missed my son Marcus's high school graduation for that. My ex-wife Diana never forgave me. The divorce papers came 6 months later. Now I send her $1,400 a month in alimony and see Marcus every other weekend when he's not busy with college. Robert Callahan passed away last October. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. I was a pallbearer. The reading of the will happened 3 weeks later. That's when I met the heir. Preston Callahan, 34 years old. Robert's only son from his first marriage. The one who'd moved to Manhattan after graduating from Columbia Business School. The one who'd spent the last decade doing something with hedge funds that he described using words I'm pretty sure he made up. He showed up to the reading in a suit that cost more than my truck. Italian leather shoes that had never touched dirt. Hair styled like he was about to film a commercial. Preston inherited controlling interest in Callahan Regional Trust. 51% of voting shares. His stepmother got the house and a generous trust fund. The staff got modest bequests. I got a handwritten note from Robert that his lawyer read aloud. Wyatt knows this land better than anyone alive. Listen to him. Preston smiled politely when he heard it. The kind of smile you give a waiter who's trying too hard. The changes started within 2 weeks. First meeting, he gathered the whole office. 12 people who'd worked for his father between 8 and 30 years. He stood at the head of the conference table, where Robert used to sit with his coffee and his reading glasses, and he told us about his vision. Strategic repositioning, he said. We're pivoting from passive land management to active development, high-value projects with accelerated ROI timelines. I watched my colleagues nod along like they understood. Maybe some of them did. I just heard a man who'd never walked a property line talking about developing land he'd never seen. His first big project was Copper Ridge Estates, a luxury golf resort community on 1,200 acres in the Eastern Valley, 18-hole championship course, 340 custom home lots, clubhouse with farm-to-table restaurant. The projected value at build-out was $287 million. I raised my hand during the presentation. "What's the water allocation plan?" Preston looked at me like I'd asked about the moon landing. "We're filing for municipal connection, standard development protocol. Municipal doesn't reach that far east. You'll need well permits, and the aquifer rights in that corridor are complicated." "Then uncomplicate them. That's what I'm paying you for." He wasn't paying me for anything. His father had structured my compensation, but I didn't correct him. I spent 3 weeks putting together a water assessment, mapped every well within 5 miles, traced every filing back to the 1940s, documented exactly which rights were available and which were locked up tighter than a bank vault. The answer wasn't what Preston wanted to hear. The Copper Ridge site sat directly downstream from my grandfather's claims. Cedar Creek Aquifer fed the whole eastern corridor. And the primary rights, the rights that superseded every other claim, belonged to a 340-acre parcel of scrubland currently assessed at $47,000. My scrubland. I didn't include that detail in my report. I just noted that primary water rights in the corridor were held by a private party and that the trust would need to negotiate acquisition or usage agreements before breaking ground. Preston didn't read the report. I know because his assistant, Linda Whitfield, told me it went straight into his review later pile, which meant the recycling bin. 2 days later, he approved construction financing for $34 million. Groundbreaking happened in March. Preston flew in from New York with investors and photographers. They all wore hard hats that had never touched a construction site. Preston turned a gold-painted shovel in soil that had been softened with a hose beforehand. I wasn't invited. If you've ever had a boss who ignored your expertise, hit that like button and subscribe. By June, the irrigation system was installed. 12 miles of buried pipe connecting to wells that Preston's contractors had drilled without checking the water rights hierarchy. They hit water at 180 feet. Good flow. Clean output. They also hit my grandfather's aquifer. I knew because the pressure in my own monitoring well dropped by 40% overnight. Someone was drawing from Cedar Creek without authorization. I could have said something then. Could have walked into Preston's glass-walled office and explained the situation. Could have shown him the survey maps, the filing dates, the chain of custody going back to 1952. Instead, I waited. The day it happened started like any other Tuesday. I was at my desk by 7:15, reviewing easement renewals, when Preston's assistant sent a calendar invite. Meeting with Preston Callahan, 2 p.m., conference room A. No agenda, no context. I knew anyway. Conference room. A still smelled like old coffee and the wood polish Robert used to insist on. Preston sat at the head of the table, where his father used to sit. Behind him stood a woman I didn't recognize, holding a tablet like she was watching someone defuse a bomb. HR, I figured. "Wyatt," Preston said, not looking up from his MacBook. "Thanks for coming in." I sat down across from him, said nothing. "I'm going to be direct with you. We're restructuring the asset management division, bringing in a specialized team from a firm in Denver. Modern methodology, data-driven approaches." I waited. "Your position is being eliminated effective immediately." The woman behind him shifted her weight. "You'll receive 4 weeks severance, continuation of benefits through the quarter, and a positive reference letter. HR will walk you through the paperwork." He finally looked up, waiting for me to argue, I think. To beg, to remind him how long I'd worked there, how much I knew, how much his father had trusted me. I thought about the 340 acres of scrubland, the water rights filed in 1952, the $34 million irrigation system currently pumping from an aquifer I controlled. "I understand," I said. Preston blinked. "That's it? That's your choice. I want you to know this isn't personal. It's about optimization, bringing in fresh perspectives. Sure. He seemed disappointed, like he'd rehearsed responses to objections I wasn't making. Linda will help you collect your things. We'd like you off premises by end of business today. I stood up. 30 years, and it took 11 minutes. At the door, I paused, turned back. Good luck with Copper Ridge, I said. Preston smiled, the same smile he'd given the waiter at his father's wake. We'll manage. I collected my things in a banker's box that Linda brought me, a few photos, my grandfather's old compass, a letter Robert had written me after the 2008 crisis, thanking me for saving the trust. I left my keys on my desk and walked out through the lobby where I'd walked in every morning for 3 decades. The parking lot was quiet. Summer heat shimmered off the asphalt. I put the box in my truck, sat behind the wheel, and looked at my phone. The county clerk's office closed at 5 o'clock. It was 2:47. If you've ever had a boss who ignored every warning you gave them, hit that like button and subscribe. The drive to the county clerk's office took 23 minutes. I parked in the gravel lot at 3:14 p.m., walked through the double doors, and asked for Barbara Hensley. Barbara had worked the records department for longer than I'd been at Callahan Trust. She knew every filing cabinet, every microfiche reel, every digital scan that had been done wrong and needed the original pulled. More importantly, she knew me, Wyatt Thorne. She looked up from her computer. Haven't seen you in here since that boundary dispute last spring. Need to pull some water rights documentation, Barbara. My grandfather's filings from 1952. Earl Thorne's claims? She was already typing. Cedar Creek Aquifer? That's the one. She printed the records in 11 minutes. Primary water rights, filed March 14th, 1952. Chain of custody through my father, transferred to me upon his death in 2003. Never contested, never sold, never leased. I also filed a formal notice of unauthorized extraction. Documented the well drilling at Copper Ridge. Noted the 40% pressure drop in my monitoring well. Requested immediate enforcement review. Barbara stamped everything, made copies, handed me the originals in a manila envelope. This about that new golf course development? She asked. Might be. She nodded slowly. Your grandfather was a smart man, Wyatt. Filed those claims before anyone knew what they'd be worth. Yes, ma'am, he was. I drove home with the envelope on my passenger seat. My place sits on 12 acres at the edge of my grandfather's original parcel. Small house, decent barn, a view of the mountains that never gets old. Rex met me at the door, tail wagging, sensing something different in the way I moved. I poured 3 fingers of bourbon. The good stuff, not the daily drinker. Sat on my back deck and watched the sun drop behind the ridgeline. Then I made one phone call. Danny Fitzgerald, Navy buddy from my supply ship days. Now a water rights attorney in Phoenix, specializing in Western allocation law. Wyatt. His voice was careful. Been a while. Need a legal opinion, Danny. I explained the situation. The 1952 filings. The unauthorized extraction. The $34 million irrigation system currently pumping from my aquifer without permission, compensation, or acknowledgement. Danny was quiet for a long moment. You're telling me a development trust is drawing primary water from an aquifer you hold superior rights to, and they never checked the filings? That's what I'm telling you. And they just fired you. 47 minutes ago. He laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind you make when you see someone walk into a propeller. Wyatt, under Western prior appropriation doctrine, senior rights holders can demand cessation of junior extraction during any period of shortage or conflict. If you file for enforcement, the State Water Board will issue a cease and desist within 30 days. Maybe faster, given the documentation you're describing. What about the golf course? What about it? An 18-hole championship course in August heat without water rights? That's not a golf course, Wyatt. That's a very expensive desert. I thanked him, hung up, finished my bourbon. The next morning, I drove out to the source. Cedar Creek doesn't look like much on the surface, just a dry wash most of the year, with cottonwoods marking where the water table rises close to the surface. But underneath, the aquifer spreads across 2,400 acres of fractured limestone. My grandfather spent 3 years mapping it. I spent my childhood learning to read his maps. The valve station sits on my property. A concrete box built in 1978 when the county tried to establish a municipal connection. The project fell through when they couldn't negotiate rights with my father. The infrastructure stayed. I opened the access panel with a key I'd carried on my ring for 26 years. Checked the gauges. Flow rate was up 30% from baseline. Pressure dropping steadily. Copper Ridge was draining my aquifer. I made the adjustment at 8:47 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Turned the primary distribution valve from open to closed. Felt the resistance in the wheel. Decades of mineral deposits grinding against the seal. Heard the water stop moving through the pipe. Somewhere, 11 miles downstream, Preston Callahan's championship golf course had just lost its water supply. I locked the panel, drove home, made coffee, and waited. The first call came at 11:23 a.m., Linda Whitfield's number. I let it ring through to voicemail. The second call came at 11:58. Preston's direct line, voicemail. By 2 p.m., I had 14 missed calls. Preston, Linda, 2 numbers I didn't recognize. The Trust's main office line, 3 times. I was on my deck, throwing a tennis ball for Rex, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dad, you okay? Some guy from your old work called Mom asking where to reach you. Sounded stressed. I texted back, I'm fine. Tell your mom not to worry. Dinner Sunday? Sure. Love you. Love you too. The voicemails piled up. I listened to a few. Linda, professional but tight. Mr. Thorne, we're experiencing some issues with the Copper Ridge water supply. Mr. Callahan was hoping you might have some insight. Please call back at your earliest convenience. Preston, trying to sound casual. Wyatt, hey, it's Preston Callahan. Listen, I know yesterday was awkward, but we've got a situation out at the development site, and someone mentioned you might know something about the water infrastructure out there. Give me a call when you get this. Preston again, 3 hours later, no longer casual. Wyatt, I need you to call me back. Now. We've got a serious problem, and I'm told you're the only one who understands the water rights in that corridor. This isn't optional. The final voicemail came at 6:47 p.m. Not Preston. A woman's voice. Older. Tired. Mr. Thorne, this is Margaret Callahan, Robert's widow. I understand my stepson terminated your employment yesterday. I also understand there's been some difficulty at the Copper Ridge site. I'm not involved in trust operations, but I wanted you to know that Robert spoke very highly of you. He said you were the most honest man he ever worked with. Whatever's happening, I hope you'll do what's right. For everyone involved. I saved that one. Thursday morning, I drove into town for breakfast at Mabel's Diner. Vinyl booths, bottomless coffee, waitresses who'd known me since I was buying feed for my grandfather's horses. Dottie poured my coffee without asking. Heard there's trouble out at that fancy golf course. That so? Janet's boy works the grounds crew. Says the irrigation system went dry yesterday morning. Whole course is turning brown. They've got some big investor tours scheduled for Saturday. Sounds like a problem. Sounds like someone didn't do their homework. I ate my eggs, read the local paper, drove home. The Copper Ridge situation was making regional news by Friday. I read the article on my phone while Rex slept at my feet. Luxury development faces water crisis. Copper Ridge Estates, a $287 million golf resort community in the Eastern Valley, has suspended operations due to an apparent water rights dispute. Sources indicate the development's irrigation system has been offline since Wednesday, with temperatures forecast to exceed 100 degrees through the weekend. The article quoted an anonymous trust employee. Nobody checked the water filings. The senior guy who knew this stuff got let go on Tuesday. Now we're scrambling. It quoted Preston Callahan, "This is a temporary technical issue. Our legal team is reviewing all options, and we expect full resolution within days." It quoted Danny Fitzgerald, identified as a water rights attorney, familiar with Western allocation law. If someone holds senior appropriation rights to that aquifer, the development has no legal standing to extract water without their permission. This isn't a technical issue. It's a property rights issue, and those don't resolve in days. I called Danny after I read that. "You talked to the press?" "They called me. I gave them the general legal framework. Didn't mention your name." "Appreciate that." "Wyatt, I'm getting calls from Callahan Trust's legal department. They want to negotiate." "Let them call. They're offering to buy your rights. Starting offer is $2.3 million. I thought about that number. More money than I'd make in 30 years. Enough to pay off Diana, set Marcus up for life, retire to somewhere with a fishing pier and no phone signal. No. No. Not interested in selling water rights. Tell them I'm interested in something else." "What's that?" I watched a hawk circle over the dry grass. "The land. All 1,200 acres of Copper Ridge. Whatever they paid for it, minus whatever they've already lost. I want the deed." Danny was quiet for a long moment. "Wyatt, that's not how these negotiations usually go." "I know, but I'm not interested in usual. I'm interested in watching Preston Callahan explain to his investors why he's selling a $287 million development to his fired land manager for pennies on the dollar. They'll never agree to that. Then they'll never get water." I hung up, threw the ball for Rex. My phone buzzed 17 more times that afternoon. I didn't answer. Saturday came. The investor tour. I drove out toward Copper Ridge, parked on a ridge overlooking the property. From half a mile away, I could see it. The fairways had gone from emerald to brown in 4 days. The greens, those precision-engineered putting surfaces that cost $40,000 each to install, looked like patches of dead straw. The ornamental ponds had dropped 6 inches, exposing muddy banks and dying landscaping. A cluster of vehicles sat in the clubhouse parking lot. SUVs and luxury sedans. The investor tour, watching their $287 million opportunity, turned to dust in the August heat. I could see someone in a suit, Preston probably, gesturing wildly at a group of people in polo shirts. Even from this distance, his body language screamed panic. My phone rang. Preston's number. I watched him, tiny in the distance, phone pressed to his ear. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Click. The certified letter arrived at Callahan Trust headquarters on Monday morning at 9:14 a.m. I know, because I paid for delivery confirmation. Inside was a single page. My formal demand for cessation of unauthorized water extraction from the Cedar Creek Aquifer, pursuant to my senior appropriation rights, filed March 14th, 1952. Attached were copies of every relevant document. The original filings, the chain of custody, the pressure readings from my monitoring well, the State Water Board's preliminary enforcement notice, which Danny had helped me expedite. The letter gave them 72 hours to respond. They responded in 4. Preston Callahan himself called at 1:47 p.m. I was replacing a fence post on my north boundary when my phone rang. I answered this time. Wyatt. His voice was different now. The polished confidence had cracked. Underneath was something raw. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "This water rights situation. There's been a misunderstanding. My team should have consulted you before." "Your team did consult me. I submitted a water assessment 3 weeks before groundbreaking. You didn't read it." Silence. That report mentioned complications. I'm looking at it now. But it didn't specify that you personally held the rights. It mentioned that primary rights were held by a private party. That party was me. You could have asked. Why didn't you just tell me? I leaned against my fence post, watched Rex chase a rabbit into the scrub brush. Would you have listened? More silence, the kind that answers the question. Wyatt, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. We'll buy your water rights at full market value, $3.8 million. That's above what any appraiser would. Not interested. $5 million. Preston, I don't want your money for water rights. Then what do you want? I want Copper Ridge. I heard him exhale, a sound like someone punched in the stomach. That's absurd. That property is worth... It's worth nothing without water. Right now, you've got 1,200 acres of luxury dirt and a $34 million irrigation system connected to an aquifer you can't legally access. Your investors watched their championship golf course turn brown on Saturday. Your lenders are going to start asking questions. Your insurance doesn't cover this because it's not an act of God. It's an act of negligence. My lawyers say we can fight this. Prior appropriation isn't absolute. There are provisions for... Your lawyers are billing you by the hour to tell you what you want to hear. Danny Fitzgerald, who actually specializes in Western water law, says you have no standing. The State Water Board agrees. You can fight it for years and spend millions. Or you can accept reality. And reality is you taking my development. Reality is you selling me a property you can't develop at a price that reflects its actual value without water rights, which is roughly what the land cost before you broke ground. That's pennies on the dollar. Yes, it is. Preston's voice went cold, the arrogance returning, brittle now. You planned this. From the beginning. You knew about those rights and you never said anything. You let me fire you knowing exactly what would happen. I submitted a report warning you about water complications. You didn't read it. I tried to tell you in the meeting. You told me to uncomplicate it. I gave you every opportunity to ask the right questions. You were too busy optimizing. This is extortion. This is property rights. Your father understood the difference. I heard something break on his end. A glass, maybe. Or his composure. I'll see you in court, Wyatt. Bring your lawyers. I'll bring my water filings from 1952. We'll see which one the judge finds more persuasive. Click. The board meeting happened 3 weeks later. I wasn't there, but Linda Whitfield called me afterward. She'd quit the trust 2 days after my termination, citing irreconcilable differences in management philosophy, which meant she couldn't stomach working for Preston. You should have seen it, Wyatt. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in years: satisfaction. The investors pulled out first. Then the lenders demanded accelerated repayment. The board called an emergency session to review Preston's decisions. How'd that go? Margaret Callahan showed up, Robert's widow. She'd been reviewing the trust's founding documents. Turns out Robert included a clause requiring board approval for any development project over $10 million. Preston never got approval for Copper Ridge. He just announced it. So the board voted to remove him as managing director. Unanimous, 7-0. His own stepmother cast the deciding vote. I thought about Margaret's voicemail. Robert spoke very highly of you. He said you were the most honest man he ever worked with. What happens to Copper Ridge? That's why I'm calling. The board wants to negotiate. They're prepared to sell you the property at assessed land value, pre-development. $1.2 million for the whole parcel. I did the math. $287 million projected value. $34 million in construction already completed. Selling for $1.2 million. Pennies on the dollar. I'll have Danny draw up the papers. The signing happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. The conference room at the trust's office still smelled like old coffee and wood polish. Robert's portrait still hung on the wall. I sat at the table where I'd been fired 11 weeks earlier. Across from me sat the trust's new managing director, a woman named Catherine Wells, who'd been Robert's chief financial officer before Preston pushed her into early retirement. She'd come back at the board's request. Mr. Thorne, she slid the documents across the table. I want you to know that everyone in this room recognizes what happened here was a failure of leadership, not on your part. I signed where she indicated, page after page. Robert Callahan trusted you for 30 years, she continued. His son should have done the same. His son had different priorities. His son is currently facing a lawsuit from our insurance company and a negligence claim from our investors. He's also being investigated by the State Real Estate Board for failure to disclose material encumbrances. I looked up from the papers. I didn't ask for any of that. No, you didn't have to. I signed the final page. She countersigned. The notary stamped everything. Just like that, I owned Copper Ridge, 1,200 acres of Eastern Valley land, an 18-hole golf course infrastructure that would need complete rehabilitation, 340 planned home lots, a clubhouse with a farm-to-table restaurant that had never served a single meal, and primary water rights to feed all of it. I drove out there the next morning, parked where Preston had turned his gold-painted shovel in the softened dirt, walked the brown fairways, the dead greens, the empty irrigation channels. The course was salvageable. Danny had already connected me with a water management company that could get it running by next spring. The home lots would take longer, but the land was good. The infrastructure was solid. The location was perfect. All it needed was someone who understood that water isn't just valuable. Water is everything. Marcus came with me the following Sunday. We walked the property together, father and son, while I explained what his great-grandfather had known 70 years ago. So you just waited? Marcus kicked at the dry grass. All those years, you knew you had those rights, and you never said anything? Didn't need to say anything. The rights were filed. Anyone could have checked. But they didn't. No, they didn't. He was quiet for a while. We reached the edge of the property, where my grandfather's scrubland bordered what would become the first residential phase. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure. When they fired you, were you angry? I thought about it. The conference room. Preston not looking up from his MacBook. The HR woman with her tablet. 11 minutes to end 30 years. I was calm. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. I put my hand on his shoulder. He was taller than me now. When did that happen? I was angry, Marcus, for about 10 minutes. Then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. He said the land doesn't care about anger. The land doesn't care about pride. The land only cares about patience, about who's willing to wait. And you waited. I waited. We drove back to my place as the sun dropped toward the mountains. Rex met us at the door, tail wagging like he'd been worried we'd never return. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon for myself, a soda for Marcus, and we sat on the back deck watching the light fade. You're going to develop it yourself? Marcus asked. Thinking about it, got an offer from a group in Denver to partner. They'd handle construction, I'd maintain water management, and land oversight. That sounds like your old job. It is my old job, just with better terms. He laughed. First time I'd heard him laugh like that in months. We sat there until the stars came out, father and son, the land stretching out around us in the darkness, waiting for whatever came next. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in a certified letter, in a valve turned at 8:47 a.m., in a board vote of 7-0. Sometimes justice is simply knowing what you own and being patient enough to let the people who dismissed you discover it themselves. Preston Callahan learned something his father could have taught him if he'd bothered to listen. In the West, credentials don't matter. Connections don't matter. Corner offices and Italian shoes and Columbia Business School don't matter. What matters is what's filed at the county clerk's office. What matters is what flows beneath the surface. What matters is water. And water was mine. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.